Hi, welcome to the world of 3D and Blender. As name of this episode suggests, in 1 hour episode I will try to guide you through first time opening Blender, navigating its user interface, manipulating and creating objects, adding materials, rendering out and saving your image. All of this in 1 hour episode, so really you will become a 3D illustrator by the end of this episode, even though the forms we'll be creating are very simple and you can see the image we are going for on the screen right now. So that's the simple style I'm gonna teach you today, but you would be surprised how far the style could get you. You can serve clients with this, you can basically build your entire career using only very cute stylized boxy style if you are good with controlling lighting, colors and stylizing objects. So this is what we are going to create, and of course we'll be using Blender software to achieve this. And first step will be to go and download Blender if you didn't already. So just go to blender.org, or you can find the link in the description and just click download here and download the latest version for your system, whether you have a Mac or Windows. Wait for it to download, then run the installer. This is pretty much very standard, and then launch Blender. Now when you launch it, you will see the splash screen here, and if this is first time for you running Blender, you will have a bunch of different options right here. Just leave them at default, leave the default Blender controls, just basically confirm this and click away to dismiss the splash screen. And one more thing, in terms of Blender versions, in some later episodes you might see some older versions of Blender since like version 2.8, but don't worry about this. These changes aren't so dramatic because they changed the versioning system lately. So what before was increasing like 2.81, 2.82 is now whole versions, so 3.1, 3.2, now this is version 4. So it looks like the current versions are miles away from the versions I used to record some of the other content, but don't worry about this because I always go back to those episodes and edit the content, add subtitles where it's necessary to show you that there is some change you have to be mindful of. So just don't worry about the Blender versions. And of course this episode is recorded using latest Blender 4. Now with the Blender open, it might look a little bit daunting because it's really technical and there's a lot of stuff happening there. But also don't worry about this. I will give you only the necessary information as we go through the episode, so you won't be overwhelmed, and you definitely don't need to know where every button is and what every function does. So the first main component of Blender is this large window right in front of you. It's called viewport, and it's basically where all the magic happens. And the first thing you want to know when you want to work with software like Blender is how to navigate this viewport, how to look at your scene from different angles, zoom in, zoom out and stuff like that. And for this we have a bunch of controls in the right top corner, so let's explore them. First of all, there's this colorful gizmo right here, and basically you can just click and hold and you will see you can rotate around your object and your scene just like this. But it would be really tedious to every time go here and manipulate the viewport. So of course Blender offers a variety of shortcuts, whether it's on the keyboard or a mouse. And to control the viewport in easiest way, you need to have 3-button mouse or a mouse with a clickable scroll wheel, and you just click and hold the middle mouse button and drag around to do the same rotation. Now it might be possible that you don't have access to 3-button mouse, or you're working on a laptop or something like that. In that case, there's a workaround. Just go edit, preferences, and in the input section you will find emulate 3-button mouse. So if you check this box, you don't need to save anything, just close the preferences. Now if you hold Alt key and use left mouse button, you can see right here where I have the screencast, it identifies this as a middle mouse button even though I'm physically clicking the left mouse button. So this is the emulation. So for example, if you have like an Apple Magic Mouse or you're working on a touchpad, holding Alt and using left mouse button will do the trick, though some of the shortcuts might be unavailable to you, especially those that use combination of Alt and left mouse button, but I will give you a heads up when something like this will happen. So let me go back and disable this. And now for more viewport controls, we have the zoom icon right here and the hand icon. Zoom, of course, self-explanatory. You click and hold and drag forward or back to zoom in or out, but you can of course use the mouse wheel to do the same thing. And then there's this hand icon. If you click and hold, you can pan around your object, around your scene, just like that. And if you want to do this with mouse, just hold shift and use the same middle mouse button to pan around. So again, to recap, middle mouse button to rotate, shift middle mouse to pan around, and mouse wheel to zoom in or out. And for the emulation, let me go back and turn it on. Alt and left click to rotate, Alt and shift and left click to pan, and Alt and control and drag to zoom in or out. So those are the basic mouse control. Let me disable this. And now that you control the navigation, it might happen that you will get lost, or lose the center of rotations and you don't know where your objects are. In that case, there's a very handy shortcut. On the keyboard, you can just press period on your numpad on the keyboard, the one next to the 0, and it will return you to the center of your object, and you can just rotate around your object again. Now, in case that you are on a laptop without numpad, or you don't have this key available for whatever reason, you can use the tilde shortcut. That's the one next to the numbers on top of your keyboard, and all the way to the left, right above the tab, there's the button, and if you press it, you will get this pie menu in Blender, and there's a function called view selected, which is basically the same thing. So if you get lost, you can just hit tilde key and click view selected, and you're back. And basically these 4 things are what you need to be able to successfully navigate the viewport and to be able to return to your object whenever you need. And now, of course, the next thing you want to do is to manipulate the objects in your scene. And to do that, you first of all need to select them. And this is pretty straightforward. Just as in any other software, you just left click on objects and you're able to select them. Or if you have this tool active right here, you can just click and drag to select them. If for some reason you don't have this toolbar right here, if it looks like this, you will always see this little arrow here, and you can just drag the toolbar out like this, or use the T shortcut to show it and hide it. And if you want to deselect objects, you just click away and everything is deselected. Now, in terms of transformations and manipulating the objects, just select the cube right here and right on the toolbar. And again, if you don't have it here, just expand it using the arrow. You can see the move tool, the rotate tool, scale tool, and transform. Let's start with the move tool. You can click it and now you will see those arrows, which are color coded according to the axis. So if you want to move along the x-axis, you just click and hold the red arrow and drag your object around, or y-axis, whatever you need. And if you want to move this in relation to your camera view, you can just click this white circle and move it around like this. Now let's move on to rotations. And again, pretty self-explanatory. If you want to rotate around y-axis, you just click and grab this green circle and rotate your object. And again, if you want to rotate in relation to your viewport angle, just click and hold the white circle and it will rotate like this. Let me go back. And now for the scale, this is pretty similar. Again, we are able to scale along Y, along X, and there are these little squares, and these are basically combination of 2 axes, and they're color coded based on the axis which they exclude. So for example, if I don't want to scale height, I don't want to scale along Z axis, I will click and drag the blue square, and same applies for transformations. I can move, for example, if I don't want to move on X, I will choose the red one, the X one, and I'm only moving on Z and Y axis. And then there's the last transform tool, which is like unified version of all of these. So you can move, you can rotate, you can scale, and again, you can move and rotate. There's no like unified scale control right here. And basically that's for the transformations, and this is probably the easiest way how to intuitively control the position and rotation of the objects in your scene, though later we'll use shortcuts to make this even more easy. Now let's move on and let's reset the scene, and the easiest way to do that is to go File and create a new one. And basically what you can see here is the default scene. This can be modified later, so you don't have to, have the cube and the light and the camera each time you open Blender, but this is the default behavior, so I wanted to have it like this. And now we'll go ahead and create the sushi, but before we do, you need to understand the different modes in the viewport. So right now we are in the object mode, as it's indicated right here in the top left corner. And if you click here, you can see a bunch of different modes, but the two most important ones right now for us are object mode and edit mode. There's a lot of confusion sometimes as to which mode you use to what in Blender, so I'll try to explain this as best as possible. But for now, let me just go here in the outliner, and we'll deal with this section later again. I will just use it right now to demonstrate the difference between the object mode and edit mode. So if I expand this little icon right here, you can see there's a cube object, and there's the green icon underneath called cube again. So this is the object, and this is the object data, and in particular this is the mesh data, and there is some material assigned to those data. So you can see the object outlined here in the yellow as a container for some data within, and the data is accessible right here. And basically if you want to directly access and edit the data underneath, you will need to go to the edit mode. So basically the object mode manipulates the object, the container, and the edit mode manipulates the data inside. So you're using the edit mode to define the shape of the object and stuff like that. So let's now go ahead and switch to edit mode, and you will see the cube lights up and the toolbar change as well. So the toolbar is really contextual, and it's different for edit mode and object mode, even though the transformations are still here, because you can move the data and you can move the container as well in the object mode. Even though the transformation tools are pretty similar as well, but there are a bunch of new tools that are useful if you want to manipulate your object data, or in this case mesh. This whole thing is called mesh, and it kind of consists from these small dots which are called vertices. One of them is called vertex, and you can just click and select one of these vertices and basically manipulate them on their own. So if you, for example, use the move tool, you can move only a single vertex, and that means you modified this green data underneath the container. And if you go to the object mode, now you will see the object looks differently. So now let me go back here, and right here next to the mode you will see the select mode, and right now it's set to vertex select, so we are able to select vertices, and those lines in between them are called edges. And if you want to select those, you will switch this to edge and select these individual edges. And of course there's a third one, the face select mode, and if you choose that one, you are able to select whole faces, or polygons as they are called. So these are the faces, then there are edges and vertices. And now to make the sushi, we'll use this cube, but we'll need to scale it down. So let me zoom out a little bit, and now we'll select everything, but just dragging a selection like this won't work, because if I do that and rotate, you will see this vertex isn't selected because it's obscured by the geometry in front. So to do that successfully, you need to enable the X-ray mode right here, and that will enable you to see through and select everything here. So let me disable that. And now we are able to scale this down, and we are doing it in the edit mode. And as I explained before, the object is the container, the wrapper, and the data underneath, the mesh, defines how the object looks. So if I want to change the shape of the object, its proportions, and edit how it looks, I will go into the edit mode and do it there. And then in the object mode, that's more suitable for positioning that object in the world and maybe scaling here and there. But mostly what I'm interested in when I'm changing the shape of the object, I'm looking to go into the edit mode. So you could easily just go now and use the scale tool right here, but I want to show you a shortcut for this. And to scale something, you can use the S command on the keyboard. It's very easy to remember, you know, S for scale. So you can press S and you will see this tool behaves a little bit differently than if you select it from the toolbar, because you will get this dashed line, and as you move your mouse, you can make this larger and smaller, and you don't need to hold the S button. I just press it once and you immediately go into this interactive tool mode, and basically Blender waits for your command, for your left click to confirm the action, or on the other hand, right click to cancel the action. So if I right click, I will go back. So let me press S again, and then it's very easy to chain these kind of interactive commands, because then I can use Z key, and down in the bottom of the viewport you can see all the different shortcuts that can be chained after using S. So you can see there's a Z for Z axis. That means I can isolate this command only for the Z axis. So let me press Z. And right now I'm just scaling the original cube along the Z axis, which is what I want. So let me go down a little bit and scale it like that and confirm with the left click. So yeah, we just scaled the cube, we modified the shape in the edit mode, and now we are ready to create that very simple stylized sushi. So let's zoom in a little bit. And as you can see on the reference image, there's a hole in the middle here. So to be able to do that, we'll need to add a little bit more geometry to our object. And for that, you can subdivide this. Now, all of these commands are available in the user interface right here. So you can see different commands for select, for mesh, for vertex, for edge, for faces. But there are a handful of them. And if you want a quick access, you can just right click wherever in the screen, in the viewport, and you will get access to those same options. And they're really contextual. So if you're in the vertex mode, you will get the vertex menu. But if you change to the edge select mode, right click will get you the edge context menu, and same for the face menu. So for this, doesn't really matter. You can right click and there will be a subdivide options right here. And if you click it, you basically split the faces in half along each of the axes. So you can see from the top face, we now have 4. And if I do it again, so right click and choose subdivide, I get even more. So again, it's halved. And if I do it again, I will get a double number of faces. But this is enough, because I can see right here in the middle, there are 4 faces that we will be able to work with. So let's go for face select right here and click one of these faces. And you can either click and drag the selection to select multiple faces, or you can hold shift and add to the selection just using single click like this. And with this middle selected, we're now ready to move on and learn a new tool. But before we do, make sure you hit Ctrl S or go File and save your work, and learn to do this as often as possible, because Blender will crash, your computer will crash, something will happen. The best thing to do is to create that habit where you're pressing Ctrl S all the time, so your work is always saved. So let's press Ctrl S to save, and let's move on and learn a new tool. Now we'll need to push these faces inside, because here around I want this to be representing like a rice, and then inside we'll have like most commonly the salmon or some cucumber or something like that, and then around we'll of course make a seaweed. But to be able to push this inside, we need to learn a new tool, and that'll be the Extrude tool, and you can find it here in the toolbar. Just hover here and you will see Extrude region. If you click it, you basically enable that tool, and you will see this little gizmo that would enable you to work with this. So if you just click and drag, you are able to extrude this up or push this inside. The extrude will allow you to go both ways in Blender right here. So let's just go inside a little bit like this and then release. But there's another option if you want to do this. Let me go back to the box select. You can use the same interactive tool as with the transformations, as with the scale before. And instead of clicking the tool, you can just press E for the extrude command. So first of all, let's select this face right here because I want to extrude it further down. And let's press E. And now you will see you're in this interactive mode for extrusion, same as before with the scale. And you can just move it up and down. And I think this is more precise than using the tool by click and drag, because you don't need to strain your muscle as when you're clicking and dragging. So let's move it like this and then confirm with the left mouse button, and the extrusion is complete here. And now the final touch I want to do here is to extrude these faces all around to create like a thin strip for the seaweed around the sushi. And of course you can just select the face, hold shift and go around your object and add to the selection, but that would be too tedious. So of course there's a better way in Blender, and you can just hold Alt key and click the edge right here and you will select the loop. So this kind of selection around the object is called loop, and to be able to select it you need to click on the edge that's perpendicular to the loop. So if I hold Alt and click on the edge up here, you will see I'm selecting in this direction. If I want to switch the direction of the loop, I'm holding Alt and clicking on this edge right here. And the beauty of Blender is most of the time you can chain commands or add shortcuts and they will work as expected. So as normally holding shift allows me to add to the selection, the same thing will apply here. So if I hold Alt for a loop selection and then hold shift additionally, I can click additional edges and add additional loops. Now this won't work for you if you're using dead mouse emulation I've been talking about before. So let me just go ahead and enable that real quick. So now if I'm holding Alt and clicking, nothing happens because I'm using this combination to rotate the viewport. So to be able to select the loop, you can just double click the edge, either the one on the top or on the side to select this loop. And if you now hold shift and double click, you will add to the selection. So same thing as before. Now let's disable this again. And now to be able to extrude this, I cannot just use E again because that will enable extrusion in a single direction. So if I press E, it just moves to the side, either on one or the other. And this is not working for us properly, so we'll need to use different mode for the extrusion. But here I want to take the opportunity to warn you of something that can happen to you and that will ruin your model and make your Blender experience miserable, and that's double geometry. So for example, if I'm extruding like this and now I decide I don't want to do that and I right click to cancel, it cancels out nicely, but this doesn't work as with the transformation where it basically just jumps back to the position. Right here the geometry was already created and it's already there. So right now you have double vertices on all of these faces that were selected. Let me demonstrate. If I go to the vertex select and I can click and move this vertex away, you will see there's another right behind it. Let me go back. And as I said before, this would cause nightmares. It can break your modifiers later, it can break your rendering, it can break materials. A lot of things can be broken, and this is one of the most common mistakes when you're starting with Blender, creating a double geometry and then having all kinds of troubles, problems and glitches. And the easiest remedy for that is to merge vertices by distance. So if I select everything, let me go to the X-ray, select everything here and go mesh and merge, and I can merge them by distance. And that means if they're overlapping, they will get merged and we no longer will have double geometry. But of course there's a shortcut for that, and you can see right here it's M for merge. So let's just press M and merge by distance, and right down here you will see the message that Blender removed 32 vertices that were double and that would cause trouble down the road. So let's disable the X-ray view, and now let's go back to the face select and select those loops. So Alt click and now hold Alt and Shift and select those other loops, and we can now use that extrude. So if you click and hold on the extrude region here in the toolbar, you will see different tools here, but they will all behave in a similar way. So if I go extrude along normals, you will see the gizmo and it's click and drag, which I don't prefer. So let me just switch this back to extrude region and go back to the select mode. Instead of E, we'll just use Alt E and we'll get the same extrude menu right here, and we can choose extrude face along normals. But what does it mean exactly? If I go here and enable normals, they are these vectors pointing out of your faces, and basically you can think of them as little arrows that point to a direction your face is rotated towards. So if I want to extrude these outside, these will need to go left and these will need to go right. And that's exactly what extrude along normals will do for us. So let me disable those normals. And finally, we'll press Alt-E, extrude faces along normals, and just extrude. And now additionally, there's a quick shortcut to make this even, because you can see Blender is trying to kind of round it out. And I just want a nice cubic sharp design. So let's press S while extruding. And again, we're taking the advantage of that interactive tool behavior to chain additional commands like the S for even scaling. So let's scale it like this. And now finally I want to extrude this up a little bit so the separation here is visible. And now that we know how to select loops, we can just hold Alt key, click here and press E to extrude this up. And now our model is ready, so we can exit the edit mode, at least for now. And you can do it again here and just switch the mode, but there's of course a quicker way to do that, and you can use the tab key on the keyboard and just tab out and in of the edit mode. And I use this all the time. When I'm navigating the viewport, I just select the object, tab into the edit mode, and I can do my adjustments real quick and then tab out of the edit mode. Now let's move on, but before, don't forget to save. Now with your first model ready, it's time to give it some materials, i.e. colors. And basically what material is a set of properties that define how the object would look in a real world. And you can find the materials right here in the material tab. So let's click right here and you can see there's already a material in place. This is the list of materials that are assigned to this object. And this one comes from the default cube that was loaded up when you first started Blender. So just for the sake of demonstration, I will remove that with minus icon, and this is what it will look like if you create an object from scratch without any default material, and you will have to click new to create a new material slot with a new material. And now you can just change the color, but if you do that right here, let's find some color of rice. You can see the color change here, but in the viewport nothing happens. That's because there are multiple viewport modes right here, and this is a great time to go over them. And first of them is the wireframe mode, which is basically just the wire display of your model. And then the second one is the solid view, which you already know by now. And the third one is the material preview mode, and that's the one we are interested in. So let's click that one. And you will see now the color changed, and if you now start to change the color here, you will see this is now reacting. In the older Blender versions, maybe in some of the other episodes, you might see me referring to this one as a look dev mode, but it's called material preview mode. And then it's render preview, which behaves differently based on what type of render engine you have selected. But let's not worry about that right now. Important thing is that with the solid view you can model your object, and with the material preview you can see how this will look with colors and materials and everything. Now to be able to transform this into a sushi, we'll need to add more materials, more colors into it. And as you can see, there is plus and minus icon here in the material list, and you can have multiple materials for single object. So let's hit plus right here and you will see new material slot is added, and we can create a new material there and basically just change its color right here. The color is the only thing we'll be working right now in terms of materials. You can ignore all of these other options. And I want something like a salmon color here. So let's click the color and let's choose something like a salmon here. But again, nothing changes because the first material is assigned to a whole object. So to be able to change that, you need to go into the edit mode. So let's tab into the edit mode. And now you will need to select the faces you want the material to be assigned to. So make sure you're in the face select mode, and let's click here, hold shift and select these other. And of course, let's rotate this a little bit. There are these two faces hidden in the back. So let's select those as well by holding shift. And now let's select that second material slot and click assign here, and you will see it changes in the viewport. And now let's do the same thing for the cucumber down here. So let's add new material slot, create a new material, and you can immediately assign it. You don't need to change it. So let's just click here and choose the third material slot, hit assign. And now you are able to change the color to green, maybe make it a little bit darker like this. And now the last one, let's add final material slot, create a new material, and there'll be the seaweed all around. So let's hold Alt and select the face loop around, hold Shift additionally, and add all of these other loops to the selection all the way up until here, and including this one right there. And now hit assign. And now we can tab out, and you will see this is slightly different because it's white by default, but we can change it to something green. And I don't want to go like a really green color. I want to go more stylized, so maybe closer to the blue like this, and then play with the lightness like this. And yeah, basically that's it for the sushi. The model is complete and it has all the material it needs. We can go on and start building our scene, and again, don't forget to save. So let's recap a little bit. Up until now, you learned the viewport controls, you learned how to select your objects, how to go into the edit mode and the object mode, how to manipulate your mesh, extrude, move things around, and of course adding materials and colors and switching the viewport modes right here. And now it's time for probably one of the most powerful features of Blender, and that's modifiers. And you can find them right here in the modifiers tab on the right. Modifiers are an amazing way how to create things procedurally, non-destructively in Blender, without modifying the underlying data. So again, as I said before, you have your object right here and you have the data. So the modifier attaches to your object and basically leaves your data intact. You can always go back and edit your model underneath, but the modifiers on top of your object will modify its appearance on the outside, if it makes sense. Let me demonstrate right now. Let's zoom out a little bit, because I want to distribute this sushi piece around and have 6 pieces on the plate. But to do that manually, I could right click right here and basically just choose duplicate object and try to place it somewhere in the world, but it would be really tedious to kind of find where to place it. And if I want to do this evenly, that's even more hassle. So let me just go back, and the better way is to use some kind of modifier. And for this, there's a great one called array modifier. So let's add modifier right here. And you can see they're organized in this tidy list. So let's go generate and choose array. So now immediately you can see there's a new sushi in place. And there are multiple options for the array modifier. And one of them is relative offset. So first of all, you can edit count. So right now I need 3 in a row. So let's increase that by 1. And now if you start moving this, you will see you can create gap in between them. So let's leave it like 1.2. And the other way would be to use constant offset. That would be in meters. So no matter how large your object would be, it would be always spaced as you set with the constant offset. So the relative offset is okay by now, but the great thing about modifiers is that you can stack them. So let's collapse this and let's add another one, and we'll add another array modifier right here. But now we'll reset the factor X, because you can see we were duplicating the sushi along the X-axis here. That's why we use the factor X. So let's set that to 0. And let's use the factor Y, and let's set the same 1.2 there. And since this array modifier follows this one, it kind of takes the result of the previous modifier and works with that one. So with this modifier, we are no longer repeating just one sushi. We are taking 3 of them as per result of the previous modifier, and we are duplicating those. So you can see how fast it can be when you want to create like more difficult structures or something mathematical, you know, something precise, geometrical. Modifiers are a really great way to achieve a bunch of different results. And now it's a great time to kind of go back into the object mode and the edit mode and to cement that knowledge that you are absolutely sure at any time if you want to use the edit mode or the object mode. So right now we are in the object mode. That means we are controlling this container object, and that means we can move it around pressing G, which stands for grab in the transform tool. It's called move right here, but you can see the shortcut is G. Then rotate for rotation and S for scale. And as you can see, it kind of behaves as a single object, even though there are 6 pieces of the data that we created. That means the modifier will adjust your object. So on the outside, it behaves as a single one object, and you can rotate the whole thing. As opposed to, for example, if you go into the edit mode and press tab, you can, for example, select everything. By the way, there's a great shortcut for that. You can just press A to select all. And if you rotate here, you will see you are rotating only the data of the model, only the single sushi, and the modifier and the result of the modifier acts according to that. Let me press escape so we reset that. So again, great difference between object mode and edit mode. With edit mode, you are editing the single data that's inside and that the modifier then uses right here. Let's tab out, and basically those are the sushi pieces we need, and now we'll need to get them on the plate, of course. Now, before we jump into creating a plate, let's talk a little bit about this window right here. It's called the outliner, and I referenced it before when I wanted to show you the difference between object and data. Let's collapse the object, and this basically serves as a great organizational tool to kind of see all your objects that are present in the scene, all of different types of objects. You can name them, you can organize them into collections. I won't go into details right now, but I just wanted to point it out that it's really useful tool, and anytime you're lost, you can just select your object right here and then, for example, use that period on a numpad to go to it in the viewport. So again, very useful. And now let's rename the object so we can take advantage of this and have our scene organized and tidy. So let's double click the cube here and let's call this sushi. And now we'll create the plate. So to create a new object, this is the first time we are going to do that. You can just go and click add here and add a bunch of different things into the scene, including mesh objects. But of course, there's a shortcut for that. So we can press Shift A and the same menu pops up anywhere we need. So it's really convenient to have mouse right at that position, because wherever your mouse is, the menu will appear there. So let's go mesh and let's add a plane. Now this is of course too small and we'll need to scale this up, and we could easily do that in the object mode, but at the same time we need to change the shape of the object. We need to model it because right now it's only a single plane. So the best thing would be to go into the edit mode, so tab into the edit mode. And that's another thing where the outliner will shine. You can just find the sushi here and click the eye icon here, and that will hide the object so it doesn't get in the way in your viewport. And now let's press S to scale. And we could easily just scale this up and eyeball the sizing, but I want to scale this 4 times. So you can also enter numerical value for scaling, rotation, or movement operations. So just enter 4, either on a numpad or a regular one, and confirm with enter. And now we'll just extrude this up. So press E, that's the tool that you already know. Don't go up too high, something like this should be enough. And now I'll introduce you to a new tool. And these two are probably the most powerful tools here when it comes to like creating a new geometry. So this one is called the Inset tool, and it's right here. And again, you can just click it, there will be a gizmo and you can use it. But here I want to use the shortcut, and it's really beneficial to use the shortcuts. And as you go through the courses, I will be reminding you to use those shortcuts. I will be training you to use them every time we're doing something. And basically that way they will bake into your muscle memory. And by the end of my courses, you will find yourself playing Blender like a piano. So don't worry about shortcuts, don't be afraid of them, just use them and you will see by the end of my courses you will be fluent in Blender and doing things twice the speed compared to using user interface. So let's press I to inset, and let's do an inset like this right here, and then we'll press E and extrude this down, and basically that's all we need for the plate. So we can now tab out and let's name it plate here. Let's confirm with enter in the outliner, and now let's enable the sushi again. Let's unhide this, and we'll need to position it on the plate, so let's select it. And for this, the best way would be to change our view directly top down on our plate. These are a little bit different because I can rotate the view, but this will be still perspective and it's not too precise. So you want the orthographic projection right here. And to switch to orthographic projections, you can just select one of these axes right here. And for example, if you click Z, you will go and look from the top. Of course, again, it will be very tedious to go here and click on these side views each time you need to do that. So of course there's a shortcut, and I use numpad for this. So for example, number 7 is the top view, 3 is a side view, and 1 is a front view. Again, if you don't have a numpad, you can use that tilde key right above your tab key, and here you can choose top, right, and so on and so on. So let's go for a top view. Right now I will press 7 on a numpad. And to be able to position this a little bit better, we'll now take advantage of the wireframe view, because right now this is a solid color and I can't see where the shadow is, where it's inset. So if you change to wireframe mode, you will see the inner proportions of the plate, and you can now press S and scale the sushi. Now, as you can see, I'm scaling it in the object mode. That means that I'm not working with the shape of the object, I'm not redefining its height or proportions or anything. I'm merely placing it in the world, I'm matching it to a plate. So each time I have like multiple objects in scene and I just need to kind of match them together without the need to change their proportions. I do it in the object mode and I don't need to go inside the edit mode and modify the original object. So let's press G and move this to the side. Again, the G stands for grab, but it stands for the move tool. That's probably only discrepancy I saw with the shortcuts up until now. And let's press S again and scale it. And you can see it's hard to match sometimes because the origin point is right here. That's another concept that you will need to learn. But for now, it's good to remember that each object has its origin point, and that's basically the center of the object. It's 0, 0, 0 coordinates. So the fact that we created the sushi around its origin point and then just duplicated these using array modifier, we didn't move the origin point of the object, of course. That means by default, it will scale according to that origin point. So let's press G again and move it right here towards the middle. And now let's press 1 on a numpad to look from a front view, and press G then Z to move this up like this on that bottom line. Now, if you think that you made the plate maybe too thick here and you want to modify it, the best way to do it is in the wireframe mode and in the edit mode. So I'll just click the plate, tab into the edit mode, and in the wireframe mode you already see everything behind, so you can just go for vertex select all of these faces, press G then Z and just move them down. You can just move them, you don't need to use extrude or add any geometry, you can just work with this just like that and make it a little bit thinner here, and then tab out of the edit mode. Now let's rotate this, zoom out a little bit, and I will switch back to the solid view. By the way, you can use the Z shortcut to switch the modes. And now let's go to the material preview. And of course, I want to add some material to the plate, so make sure it's selected. Go to the material settings and let's add a new one. And I want to add some dark color right here. So let's just click the color and move the slider down here so it looks all like this. Don't forget to save again. And let's move on to the next part. Let's now go ahead and create some chopsticks. When you're adding a new object using the add menu or pressing Shift A, it always creates it on this cursor, and I don't mean the mouse cursor, the arrow, but this red and white circle with those black axes right there. And that's the 3D cursor that Blender uses to kind of pinpoint some location in the scene, mostly for creating new objects, or it can be used for transforms or rotations, but that's for another time. And easiest way to move it is to use the cursor tool right here. You can just click it and basically click anywhere to move it, and it will snap on the surface of the nearest object. So this will now be placed on the top of the plate, but it will be again tedious to kind of switch to the cursor tool. So while in the select mode, you can hold Shift and right click anywhere in the scene and place the cursor. So this is the shortcut I use all the time. So let's hold Shift and right click here. So I will place the chopsticks to the side of the plate right here. Let's press Shift A and we'll add a cube. Now, of course, we'll need to make this smaller. And since I'm going to be defining the shape of the object and scaling it in a different way, of course, I want to go into the edit mode. So let's tap into the edit mode. And before, when we were talking about transform tools like the scale, you could see these little boxes that would allow you to scale something only on 2 axes. So for example, if I don't want to scale these along x-axis, I would drag the red one and it will leave the red one out. And of course, you can do that with shortcuts as well. So let me switch back here. And if you use S for scaling, you can hold Shift and hit any axis you want to exclude. So in this case, I want to exclude x-axis, so I'll hit Shift X. And right here, you will see the transformation is locked only for Z and Y, the blue and green, and I can scale it down like this and create a thickness for the chopstick. And then I can press S and chain the axis again, and now I will press X, not Shift X, and that will basically isolate on the other side the transformation for only that axis. So remember, X or Shift X or Y or Shift Y will allow you to do these different operations. So let's scale it like this, for example. And now I will tab out and let's call this chopstick. And now I will press 1 on a numpad for a front view and press G, then Z to move this up. So it's placed nicely on the plate. Now let's rotate the viewport. And now I want the other one, and there are multiple ways to do that. You could of course use array again, but that's a little bit of an overkill if you just want to create 2 objects. And then again, I don't want these chopsticks to be just straight next to each other. I want to rotate them a little bit so they look like you place them a little bit randomly. And in this case, it's better to duplicate the object. And as you could see before, you can just right click and you have 2 different options for duplication. You can use Shift D or Alt D or duplicate objects and duplicate linked. Now I'll show you both of these because this is again really important and really powerful concept in Blender that will repeat all throughout all of the courses. So let's duplicate the object in a simple way right here, and I will place it like this. And now let me select the first one again, and I will duplicate this one using the linked duplicate. So let's right click and duplicate linked, or you can use Alt D. And now again, we'll go back to the concept of object mode and edit mode, the object and object data, because this is really important here. All of these 3 objects look completely the same, and you can manipulate them in object mode. You can rotate them, you can move them, and they will all totally look the same no matter what you do in the object mode. Let's go back a little bit. But there's a key difference. Now this one that we duplicated using Shift D or duplicate object, let's expand the object right here. You can see there's a cube 002, but if we open the original one right here, the chopstick, you can see there's a cube 001. So you can see the data of these 2 objects are different. We basically duplicated it, and no matter what changes we do to the other object, it will stay different. So I can just go into the edit mode for this one and make it shorter if I want, and nothing will happen. But let's select this one, the third one, chopstick 002. And if I expand the object and look at the data, you can see the data are 001, the same as the first chopstick. So as you can probably see by now, we're only duplicating the container of the object, but the data is linked. It only exists in one place within Blender file, and we're using it in both objects. So if I go into the edit mode for this one and try to shorten it, I'm now editing both of those at once. But if I'm in the object mode and scale it, for example, it will allow me to do so because we're in the object mode. We are scaling the container, not the data inside. Hopefully this all makes sense. Some of these are a little difficult concepts to understand and grasp at first, but then if you get them under your skin, it will become your second nature, trust me. But I found it really important to kind of unload this kind of information on you with your first contact in Blender, because this kind of determines how you will go on and how you will learn Blender if you will have any problems understanding the concepts and techniques on your journey. So please bear with me on these explanations a little bit until we get some more action into the way how we progress. So let's now press X and delete this object. Again, great shortcut here. So let's select the object, press X and choose delete. And now we'll select the original one. So let's now press Alt D to create that link duplicate. And remember, we can chain commands. So if you press Y, you will lock the movement on Y axis and just move it somewhere here and confirm with the left click. And now press R. And again, we'll chain the rotation with the Z axis. So press Z and just rotate it along the Z axis like that. And now we'll add some material and we'll take advantage of the fact that these are linked. So not only we get to edit them, so for example, if you want to make one side more narrow, you can do that for both at once, but we can create new material and the same material will get assigned to that linked duplicate, at least by default. It can be overridden, of course, but again, that's the story for another time. So with the new material, let's find some wooden color like this. And you can see it's changing for both. Now, finally, to tidy up a little bit, we left the cursor on the side there. You can use Shift S for snap option menu and snap cursor to world origin, and it will reset to 000 location of your scene. So yeah, basically that's all the modeling right now, and we can move on to the next part. Now let's prepare our scene for final touches, and we'll need to position our camera and set it up for the final render. And you can see we already have camera in place right here. So you can just hit 0 on a numpad or use the tilde key and choose view camera. So let's hit 0. And this is your camera view. Of course, this is too close, and also it's perspective camera. So you can see how the objects are large in the front, and as it goes back, it goes smaller and smaller, and there's quite a lot of perspective distortion. And for this kind of stylized and really geometric illustration, I really like to use isometric view or orthographic projection, which is a mathematical model how to display 3D graphics. It doesn't have anything to do with reality, so it's purely mathematical, and it can be only achieved in 3D software. So let's select the camera. You can just click on the frame here, on the camera frame, or you can select it here in the outliner. And now let's go to the output settings here, and we'll change the resolution. The standard resolution for photos, for example, is 3:2 or 4:3. I like to use 4:3 format, which has like more digital legacy. So let's enter 1600 here for X, and for Y 1200, and we'll have different ratio. And now let's go to the camera settings right here in the object data properties, and we'll switch the camera type from perspective to orthographic, and right away you will see how this changed, and everything is nice and perpendicular. there is no distortion, no perspective. And to be able to go outside, you cannot move the camera because this is purely mathematical parametrical model. You will need to go to the camera setting and only change the orthographic scale like this. So let's go something like 13 here. And additionally, you can rotate the camera to change the angle from which you are viewing your scene. Of course, you can start rotating your camera like this, but right now the cursor will come into place. As I mentioned before, you can use it for transforms and rotation. And if you go up here, you can see by default the pivot point for transformation is the median point for the object. Most of the time that's the origin point, but right here you can switch this to 3D cursor. And now if you start rotating on the Z-axis, for example, so let's press R then Z, you will see the camera rotates around that cursor. Let's hit escape to go back. And the same way we can rotate around the local axis. So you can see right here, we are now in the global settings. So if I press R and then X, I'll be rotating around the global X-axis in a weird way like this. You can see it highlighted, and we're rotating around the global X-axis. But now I want to rotate around the camera's X-axis. Now if I go to the transform and switch back to the median point, you will see this is the global X-axis. Now if you change this to local, you can see it changed, and now the camera can be moved up and down around its local X-axis, which is exactly what we want, but we want to use that 3D cursor. And now we are able to move the camera around its local X-axis around the cursor like this. And we can do that from camera. So let's hit 0 again, and we don't need the transform gizmo because we know shortcuts, of course. So let's press R and then X and rotate. And this way we are able to control this kind of angle. Let's right click. And there's one more thing you can do. You don't need to switch this to global and local anytime you need to use this. You can press the axis shortcut twice if you want to do that transformation. So let's press R, then X, and then X again to switch to the local view. And now we're doing the same thing. So you can see how these shortcuts are an amazing way how to speed up your workflow. Normally you would need to switch your origin point, you would need to go and switch to local, use transformation and play with a bunch of gizmos. Right here I can just switch the origin point, press R then X twice and start rotating. So this is like seconds saved. And if you account for that for a larger project, it will add up, trust me. So let's move it up like this so we see it from a better angle. And now you can press G then Z and move the camera up and down to position it a little bit better like this. And finally we can add some background, because when we are going to be render this, there's nothing around our object, so there would be only like a single color, and I like to place like a background play under my object so it kind of reacts to light and creates a nicer illustration with a bunch of like colorful gradients. So let's press Shift A and we'll add a plane. And right here we are not modifying the shape of this in any way, so we can just scale it in the object mode. So press S and scale it up like this so it goes outside of the camera bounds. And this will be our background. So let's go to the material settings and let's create a new one, and we'll give this background some color. So we can start, for example, with something blue like this. It will create a nice contrast, and we can move on to the next part. And this part, probably the most important one, the lighting, the thing that can make or break your scene. And really it is probably the most important thing you can do when you're working with 3D. Of course, you need all of the modeling skills and all of the technical skills to create the scene. But if you are not able to light it properly or in some nice way, basically all that work is lost, because if you cannot present your technical skills and your modeling skills in a beautifully lighted scene, then it was all in vain. So really the lighting is probably the most important thing you can learn when working with 3D, and it's a topic on its own. So here we'll be using mostly very simple, easy lighting techniques, but we'll use them in a way that make our scenes stand out. So first of all, we can see we have already light in the scene, the simple point light that was placed by the default scene in the beginning. And we can use it to demonstrate how different lights behave in Blender. But before we do, let's set up some render settings. So let's go here to the render settings. And you can see the render engine is now set to Eevee. This is the real-time engine that's powering the material preview as well. So that's basically the engine we are in right now. Of course, it can be made nicer and it can be made to react to the scene lights, but by default, this material preview is using the Eevee engine. So now only thing that changes, if you switch to the render preview, the Eevee engine will start to react to lights. Now, if you press G and start moving the lights, you can see how the scene reacts. And there are basically two main types of lights here in Blender, and there are lights that have fall off and there are lights that are only directional. In this case, it's sunlight. So point light has a fall off. So if I press G then Z and start moving it closer to the object, you will see it shines more and more light on the surface. And if I go further away, it gives less and less light, like this. So this is a light with a fall off. Basically, it has some kind of limit on how far it can shine. Now let's press X and delete the light, and this is basically the unlit scene, but it's not completely dark, and it's possible due to something called world settings right here, and that's integral part of the lighting. So if you click here to the world settings, you will see there's a color, and basically that's the color that kind of surrounds your scene and gives some basic light. So for example, if you click here and go all the way to black, you would finally get nothing, no lights in the scene, no world lights. So you can think of this as a skylight or something like that. So let's go back a little bit here, and now let's press Shift A and we'll add a light, and we'll add a sunlight. The spotlight and area lights are another type of lights that have different properties, but similar to point light, they have fall off. So if you select the sunlight, you will now see this is lit, but no matter where the light is, we'll get the same quality of light. So as you can see, the sunlight is placed in the middle of the scene right here, and it shines on our object anyway. So if you press G then Z and move it up and down, absolutely nothing changes. There's no fall off because it acts kind of like a real sun. It doesn't matter if you're on the ground floor or if you're on the top of the skyscraper, the sun will still kind of shine the same on you. Of course, there might be differences, but for the purpose of the 3D software and illustration, it's the same. So right now we can just press R and rotate the sunlight, and you will see it will cast shadows. So it reacts to the rotation because it's directional, but it doesn't have any fall off. So we can now just press R and rotate it to the side, so it gives nice shadows to the side here like this, and that'll be our basic light for the scene. Now let's just make it a little bit stronger. So let's go to the data properties for the light, and let's increase the strength to something like 3. And now already we have some illustration that has some light quality. There are some shadows in the scene, there are some brighter parts, some darker parts, so already this looks a little bit better. But I like to use Cycles engine, which is a path tracer engine, as opposed to Eevee, which is a real-time, and it more simulates the lighting and shadows as something like games, for example. Whereas the Cycles, that's the realistic render engine, and of course more demanding, so it will take longer to render out your scene. So let's go back to the render settings and let's switch this to Cycles, and you will see the difference right away. But first I want to make some adjustments. So let me go back to the material preview, and before we start taking advantage of the Eevee, let's set it up. You can see the device is set to CPU, so the Cycles will try to render this out on your CPU. If you have a GPU like NVIDIA card or something like that, take advantage of that. And first of all, you cannot only go here and switch to GPU, you need to go edit preferences, choose system. And now here you have a bunch of different options, and all of this is for a different chip manufacturer. So for example, CUDA and optics are for NVIDIA cards, HIP is for AMD, and one API is for Intel GPUs. So whichever card you have, if you have like a modern Intel GPU or you have AMD Radeon or something like that, pick your choice right here. So for example, for the RTX GPUs from NVIDIA, you will go for optics, and then make sure the box is checked right here in the preferences. And now it makes sense to switch the CPU to GPU compute, and you will see the difference in speed right away. So for example, when I switch to rendered right now, it's almost immediate, and I can zoom in and the sampling happens in much faster way. And I have a fast CPU already, but this is much faster already. Now the second thing that we can do for better previews, faster previews, is to enable denoising. Now you can see in the sampling section of our cycles render, you can choose samples. You have two different categories. You have viewport and render. Viewport is, as you might probably guessed, the viewport that we have right here when we're working on our designs, when we're editing, that's the viewport. And render is when we're doing the final render for our illustration. So for the viewport, you can set the max samples. It doesn't really matter too much, but I will limit that to 512, so we're not doing so many samples in the viewport, all for nothing. And for the render, by default, these are 4000 samples, which is quite a lot, and it will take a lot of time for like weaker GPUs, not talking about CPU. So it's best to reduce this. And for starters, you can start at somewhere like 512, but you can go even lower if you have like a weak GPU or like a weaker laptop. Don't worry about this. For learning purposes, it's okay to go for even like 64 samples or something like that. And that will determine the length your final animation or your final illustration will take. And now we'll take advantage for denoising, and you can see there are two of those. The one is for viewport again, and one is for the render. And by default for the render, there's open image denoise from Intel. I tend to switch this to optics. The open image has better results in my opinion, but optics is for me a little bit faster, so I tend to use it, and then maybe for some really final render I will use the open image. So let me collapse this, and I will enable denoising for the viewport as well, and I will leave it at automatic. It will probably use the optics, or you can just force the option right here, doesn't really matter. And now if I enable render preview, you won't even see those ray tracing dots there, and it will be blazing fast. So it just happens like this, and this is almost real time. So for a simple illustration like this, there's basically no reason, if you have a good GPU, there's basically no reason to use Eevee when you're doing final lighting. That's most important to say. I'm using solid view and material view when I'm working on my models and textures and materials and stuff like that. But the moment I go into lighting and I plan to use cycles for the final render, I use cycles viewport with denoising. So let's go back to the camera view by pressing 0 on a numpad. And now with everything set up, we can save some performance by limiting the render preview only for the camera bounce, and you can do that using Ctrl B. So press Ctrl B and just drag a selection here. And now this is the complete setup I have when I'm working with the lighting. And basically this illustration is almost good as is. I will now go ahead and transform this into more interesting design, so you can see right away here how you can change the scene into something more intricate, more interesting, with a little bit different mood and lighting. And you can use it as a tutorial if you wish. Of course, I will go a little bit faster right now because you already know all of these concepts. There will be nothing new to learn basically. So I will allow myself to go a little bit faster, but right here in the video player, there's an option to control the speed. So you can do that and follow, even if this is literally first time for you having Blender open. So let's now go ahead and modify this a little bit. I will select the background and make it a little bit darker here, and maybe a little bit violet like this. And now I will move the camera further back, so I will change that orthographic scale to something like 17, so we have more space to play with, and press G then Z and move it up a little bit because I want to create some more objects around here. And let me just select the background and scale it up using S like this. And now I want to create like a soy sauce bottle right here next to the plate, so I will shift right click to move the cursor, press shift A to add a plane, tab into the edit mode, scale it down a little bit, and now press E to extrude. And you can see I'm doing this in render preview and it all works just fine. But in case your GPU doesn't allow you to do this in real time, just switch to the material preview or even solid view, doesn't really matter. So I will press I to inset. And again, this is the same thing that we did with the plate, and I will extrude this using E and then do one more extrusion like this. There will be one new command that you will learn right now, and that's creating new cuts with Ctrl R. So I'll press Ctrl R, place a cut here and just move it up. And I will do another one here with Ctrl R, place it down. And now I will go for face select, Alt click this loop and press Alt E and extrude face along normals. Press S for that even scaling and push this inside. So again, nothing new here. And now I'll press I for inset, but I will press it once again and they'll allow me to inset these faces individually like this. And now I'll Alt click the top loop, press Alt E again and extrude along normals. Press S and create a shape like this. And now I will create a new material here and make it darker. And now I'll enable X-ray view. Look from the front by pressing 1 on a numpad and just select all of these here in the middle, including this one, and hold shift and select these on top. And create a new material slot and new material. Let's add some red color here and click assign. And now I will disable the X-ray view and just select by holding shift these around and add one last material here, something yellow, and hit assign. Maybe a little bit brighter like this, and then I will extrude this down to give this some more detail and tab out. So now if I go back to the camera view, I have completely new object in the scene, and I can press G then Shift Z to lock it on X and Y axis and move it around like this. Now I want to shift right click here to move the cursor and press Shift A and create another plane. Tab into the edit mode, press S to scale it up, and it will be another smaller plate. And I'll press E to extrude, and I will tab out and shift right click to move the cursor on top. And basically I want to create like a spring rolls right here, so press Shift A and add a plane. Now tab into the edit mode, press S to scale it down, then S then Y to scale on the Y axis, and E to extrude. So you can see these are the same operations all over again to create all of these different objects. And now I'll select the face right here, enable X-ray view, hold shift, select the one in the back, press I to inset, and Alt E and extrude faces along normals like this. And now let's create a new material. I will leave the selection active here and change to something yellowish like this. And then in the middle I will create a new material slot, new material, hit assign, and add some reddish color there. So there's detail. I will tab out now and press Alt D and X to move this on X axis, and Alt D again and X to move to the other side. And I can look from the front by pressing 1 on a numpad and move these on top of each other like this using Alt D, and then maybe make subtle movements on Y axis and subtle rotations so it doesn't look so uniform. And now let's change the color for the plate to something warmer, maybe like this. Okay, and let's create another one. So I'll shift right click here, create a new plane again, tab into the edit mode, S to scale it up, and S then Y to scale on Y axis, and then E to extrude. And now I'll tab out, shift right click here, and we'll create a nigiri right now. So let's press shift A, add a plane. And again, I will just tab in, scale it down, scale on X axis, so S then X, and E to extrude. And I have a new object right there. Tab out, shift right click to move the cursor, and create a new one in absolutely the same way, like this. And now I'll use that Ctrl R to create more cuts, and I will use mouse wheel to increase number of those cuts like this. And now I'll create a new material there and create like a salmon color. Now I'll go for face select and alt click these two loops, and by holding alt and shift select the other one as well, create the new material. We can assign the same one, duplicate it right here, that's the new thing, and assign, and now we can change the color to something different. We can tab out and have a look in the rendered preview, and of course I will change the plate color, maybe something like those chopsticks right here, and I can duplicate and change the shade a little bit. And now I can select this, press Alt D, Y, and just duplicate on the plate, and maybe now switch to median point and make some adjustments in rotation. Okay, finally some cup right here, so shift right click, and I will add a plane, tab into the edit mode, and just press E to extrude, I to inset, and E to extrude, and that's it. Basically that's all I need for a simple cup with this style. And let's create like a vessel for the soy sauce. So I will shift right click here, press shift A, add a plane, make it smaller, and S then X to scale it on X axis. And again, very simple, just use the inset and extrude. And here I'll create a new material, leave it white, and create a new material slot and create a dark material there and hit assign. So it looks like there's a soy sauce in there, and I will disable the X-ray view so it's cleaner. And right here I will shift right click, press shift A, and create a wasabi. And again, this will be fairly simple, so let me scale this down in the edit mode, press E to extrude, I to inset, and E to extrude again. And now we'll only add some fresh green color and maybe scale it down in the object mode. Now let me look from the top by pressing 7 on an numpad, and now I want to organize this a little bit better, so let me switch this to wireframe view, and let me select this and create like more even spacing between those. So I want this to be more evenly spaced here as well, so there's some kind of rhythm to the whole thing. Maybe this can be larger and closer here. Okay, and let's look from the camera, and of course the camera will need to go higher, so press G then Z and move it up like this. And now we can go back to the render preview and make this smaller. Okay, something like this, and maybe make this smaller as well. Okay, and now I can select the camera and move the whole thing so it kind of feels more balanced. And now, as you can see, this is completely different scene using the same techniques that you used to create the first set of sushi. So imagine how much powerful this can be when you really like lay out the whole world, whole city or something, and create it using this style. You can create really colorful illustration, basically create your portfolio based only on this style and get clients, you know, start your career using only this after 1 hour or 2 hours of learning. So that's it for these updates, but I have one more in my sleeve, and to adjust the lighting, because right now with the sunlight it looks nice with those sharp shadows and everything, but I want to see more gradients here. I want to see more warmer light, something that will strike me more visually. and will not feel so flat and like vector painted, basically. So let's hold Shift S, reset the cursor to world origin, and let's press Shift A and we'll add a light, an area light. Now I'll press G then Z to move this up, and there's nothing to see here because it's really weak. Now the scene is quite large. I didn't want to mess up with any scaling or like units or meters or something, so this is large. This is like 8 meters if you used it in like game engine or something, but don't worry about that. Just keep in mind that you need to set up your lights according to your scene scale, at least the ones that have fall off, like the area light. So let's set this up to something like 1500. You can see this is looking much more different right now, and I think we'll need to go even more, but let's scale it up real nice so we have these nice soft shadows in addition to those sharp ones. And let's go something even stronger like 3000, and I will look from the top by pressing 7 on a numpad and press G and move this slightly towards the back, so we get these nice reflections here in the scene like this. And now I will make this warmer. And you can see how the scene reacts, and if you start moving it around, how it will create these different reflections. And here I can probably go really orange, and then we can compensate that using the world color. So that's another way how to add ambience. And I will just go ahead and add color to this. So not only lightness, but color. And you can see how the color of the shadows changes. Before it was neutral, but now it goes more towards the violet, and you can ramp this up and really create this nice gradient between the warm and the cold color of the world light. And immediately this is much more visually striking. We can even darken the background a little bit. And then I will probably duplicate this in the back and create a closer light that will add more of the gradient in top. So I will probably make this a little bit more subtle, smaller and closer to the background like this. Okay, and now the final adjustment when you are preparing your render, just go render settings, and down here there will be a color management window. And if you expand this, you can see view transform and look, which is kind of a contrast setting, and it's always great to play with these settings. So for example, AGX is a new one in Blender 4, but for this kind of illustration I really like filmic, so I will switch it to that, and you can see how the colors are a little bit more rich right now, even though less realistic maybe. And now for the look, you can change different contrast settings, so you can go medium, high contrast, so it kind of pops up more, but I think medium contrast will be fine here. And then you can play with the exposure, so if you feel like it's underlighted or too dark, you can try to compensate that with exposure, for example. And then on the background I will go ahead and increase the roughness a little bit, so it's not that glossy, and maybe play with the distance of the main light here. And finally, when you want to render out your result, you can just go ahead in the rendering section and choose render and render image. Now, depending on your Blender setup, this will either appear here or it will open a new window, but it is the same thing. So whether it's in the new window or here in the viewport, after it's done, you can see it took only 6 seconds here. You can just go ahead, image, save as, and choose, for example, a PNG, find the folder you want to save it, save as image, and your illustration is ready in PNG. So that's it, and basically right now you had the chance to see how I transformed that very simple, almost primitive sushi illustration to a more colorful, more wide illustration that can have multiple uses. You can use this on a website, social media post, in marketing, as a brand language for brand illustration. There are a lot of options for this style again, and right here you can see all of the different illustrations that can be created this way, you know, different animals, worlds, all bunch of stuff. And I want to encourage you right now to take all of the knowledge you just learned, even though it's fresh and your head might feel full. That's the best time to get it to work, because only that way you will get it under your skin. You will make all of these shortcuts part of your muscle memory and remember what you just learned. So I immediately encourage you to go ahead and try to create a scene of your own. Just pick something favorite of yours, maybe favorite place, favorite restaurant. You can do a historic building, you can do a castle, whatever captures your interest. You can go ahead and try to create it using this style. And then when you're ready to absorb more styles, more information, more in-depth explanation in a similar way, but much more fast-paced and actionable, go ahead, check out my courses. Don't forget you can use the Sushi Master code for a discount. Go ahead, you can see all of the episodes there. Each of those episodes presents a different style added to your toolkit and empowers you to enhance your designer or illustrator career. So if you're interested, go ahead, check out the link in the description. Don't forget about the Sushi Master code. Congratulations on finishing this one. You just made the most important step. You started out and now it's all about putting in that work. So congrats and see you in the next one. What? Three, four.